Recently, I reread a book called The Way of the Heart by Henry Nouwen. And this is one of those books I need to read when I need to be reminded of why I do what I do as a Christian. Henry Nouwen is a phenomenal Christian writer. His writing style is very accessible. You can get through this book in one day, no problem. Maybe even an hour or two. It's really easy. It's about 100 pages. And what Henry Nouwen does is tries to equip people for service to the world, equip Christians for service to the world. And he argues that, I guess, an effective Christian or effective minister needs to incorporate solitude, silence, and prayer into their lives to be an effective witness for Christianity, and so on and so on. So this is a good reminder for me. I read it, like I said, a couple years ago, but I read it again recently. And I want to share some quotes from this book with the hopes that maybe you'll be encouraged to check it out for yourself. So the first quote is on page 25. Like I said, he talks about solitude, silence, and prayer. So he kind of tackles these topics in chapter by chapter and says a lot of beautiful things about what he means by solitude, silence, and prayer. So on page 25, he says, solitude is the furnace of transformation. Solitude is the furnace of transformation. Without solitude, we remain victims of our society and continue to be entangled in the illusions of the false self. So he's arguing that as we get to spend time alone and kind of get away from what everyone else expects of us and from us, and we get to sit alone with our thoughts and sit alone with our questions and sit alone with who we are, like as stripped away from all these external things as possible. He argues that's where real transformation occurs, and that's where real transformation happens. And I've seen this to be very true in my life. When I first got out of college, I lived by myself for 2 years. I didn't have a roommate, so I had a lot of time to think and to just be and try to figure out who I was, because prior to that point, I was busy. I was always doing something. I always had something, like I was occupied by many things. Even when I was, fresh out of college for those 2 years, I still was occupied, but I had a lot more downtime. And that opened up so many things for me. And I'm still benefiting from that period of my life today. So there is something about that, and I still experience these pockets of solitude. And whenever I go to a park, I feel like I'm going right back into solitude. And oh, here's another thing: like even before I got to that 2 year period after college, I still was seeking solitude all throughout college. And essentially, I've always sought solitude because I'm introverted naturally. But just to be thrown into it completely for those 2 years after college was really transformative. So he's arguing for that posture, and he's not saying that to be an effective minister you have to be an introvert. He's not saying that, but what he's saying is, introvert or extrovert, we have to have time away to see who we really are and not be caught up in the distractions and the labels and the expectations, but to sit naked before God. Like this is how we are thrown into the furnace of transformation, and we receive what I believe to be the gifts of the Christian life. So that's what he says about solitude. Then he says this about silence on page 56. He argues that we need silence. He says solitude is where we create the space, and silence is where the transformation, I guess, really starts to take root. So he says this on page 56: a word without power is a word that comes out of silence. No, I'm sorry. I said that all wrong. A word with power is a word that comes out of silence. A word that bears fruit is a word that emerges from the silence and returns to it. It is a word that reminds us of the silence from which it comes and leads us back to that silence. This is this is so dense and so well said. The older I get, the more I'm convinced that the best things I have to say emerge out of silence, which tells me something. I learn a lot more when I can keep my mouth shut, first of all, and I embrace silence. But it's in silence and solitude where I'm filled up to go out and have a valuable thing to say. Um, so part of prayer is sitting and listening. And he argues that you can have a solitude and a silence like of the heart too. You know, you don't have to necessarily be alone in a room to experience solitude, or even you don't necessarily have to be away from people to experience silence. You can have a silent posture of the heart. And what that looks like is listening, listening to people well, letting them talk more than you're talking. Let them take the first word or the last word. And wow, there's just so much here. But what he's trying to argue is that we need silence to have something valuable to say. We have to experience listening to have something valuable to say. And I love that. And then he says on page 94, a lot of beautiful things. Of course, I'm just kind of skipping around. Just wanted to share my top 3 quotes. It's a only page. There's only 94 pages, the whole book. So there's a lot of good things in between. But I just want to give you some nuggets so that you might be encouraged to pick it up yourself. On page 94, he says, "When we have been remolded into living witnesses of Christ through solitude, silence, and prayer, we will no longer have to worry about whether we are saying the right thing or making the right gesture, because then Christ will make his presence known even when we are not aware of it." Mm. And this is, man, this is the essence of Christian ministry or just Christian service. We're we're just getting ourselves out of the way so that God can do the work. You know what I mean? This is what I'm doing in solitude, in silence. I'm trying to get my ego in check. I'm trying to keep the false self in my awareness so that I'm not letting my ego and the false self just take control and ruin opportunities. What I'm trying to do is create space for the Spirit of God to work through me, the Spirit of God to fill me up, the Spirit of God to transform me so that I can then be a light and a beautiful blessing to the world. I think this is the heart of this book and the heart of spiritual disciplines and the heart of the spiritual journey. You know, we are here, I think, to be with God and to be alongside God in his efforts to bless the world and heal the world and bring about the beautification of the world. And I don't even know if I said that right because the world is already beautiful, but maybe the beautification is just being a part of the process of helping people see the beauty that's already there. Because God is already there. God has always been there, but we don't always pay attention to that. And stuff like silence, solitude, practices like silence, solitude, and prayer help us to open ourselves to God. Which leads me to another book that I will love to talk about in another video. It's called Opening to God by David G. Benner. And that's about prayer. And he argues that prayer is about opening to God. This is my second time referencing that book in these videos. So that means I have to make another video just about that book because it's really been impactful on my approach to prayer. So check out Henry Nouwen, The Way of the Heart. I know that it will probably be a blessing to you wherever you are. I'm imagining that. Because it's just definitely been a blessing to me. Thank you for watching. God's blessings on wherever you are in your life and your journey. God's peace, God's love, God's joy in your life.